Alright, so this is going to be a video about how to clean your computer. I mean, in the physical dirt coming out of it everywhere since. So we got some various size paintbrushes. Nothing crazy. Shop vac. I like shop vac because they use 3-wire grounded plugs. So there's not as much static buildup, and just regular plain hose end. You can see this is one of those kind of older, not that old, Dell BTX type chassis. Okay, now these aren't too bad. You just gotta pull that lever back. It's just too tricky to do with one hand. Oh yeah, look at that. That's some nice dust clods working in there. And sometimes they got big clumpers, and sometimes they got, like, it's everywhere. Yeah, it's not too great. I'll take that shroud off of the CPU here. This is one of those BTX cases, so the air comes in the front, goes right through the CPU, and goes up the back. Instead of ATX designs where the air is kind of, the processor's up here, and you got this hot air circulation going on up here. So, let me vacuum some of this and get the fan cover off, and we'll see how much stuff's in the fan. Okay, now I get the side panel away. You can see I'm wearing an anti-static wrist strap, which is clipped to the computer chassis, some metal part. Not really essential, but if you're going to work on computers a lot, it's probably a good idea. Buy it, only $20 or $10 or wherever. And this way you don't have to worry about shocking the heck out of the computer's insides and making it not work anymore. And when you're fixing it, that means you're going to be paying for it. So basically trying to break it. So, you got a fan enclosure in here. And usually Dells are pretty easy to take apart. And this one doesn't look too crazy either. So I'm just going to start by using the brush here to brush some of the dust towards the hose, and just watch out you don't whack any little small parts off of the motherboard with the end of the vacuum hose or with the metal part of the brush. Basically just be gentle and try to nudge the dust off. It's pretty easy to mess stuff up if you stick the brush in between some of these capacitors that are sticking out and push too hard, they'll snap off, so you don't want to do that. So I'm just going to get this cover off. Now, as it turns out in these chassis, if you remove the two screws, there's one on top here, and one underneath of this enclosure, you can just see it in the back, the whole thing will come off, and actually the CPU heatsink is not attached to the CPU, it's inside in this plastic box. So the CPU heatsink actually comes off too, which means you're going to have to reapply the thermal paste. But as you can see, this one could definitely use a cleaning, judging by the amount of gunk built up in here. So, and it's quite uncharacteristic of Dell, because usually they have really easy to take apart things with plastic tabs and stuff. Okay, so now I got obviously the heatsink off, and I took the fan housing out. So there's a plug here that goes to the motherboard here, you gotta disconnect that. And then I also took the hard drive out. Down here it just has two clips, you pull them out, pull the wires off. So I could unclip these from the clips on the side of the housing and get them out of the way. And then when you take this big housing out, on the bottom of it here, there's a clip right here, you can see. And then on this side there's a little springy clip as well. You gotta depress this and pull it out at the bottom, and you can kind of wiggle it out of its hole in here. So I was going to take a video of this. I mean, this is cleaned up now. This thing was filthy. I mean, the heatsink was all caked over. I vacuumed it off a bit. I guess we'll do some more cleaning on the CPU cooler, obviously. This thing was definitely exhibiting some overheating issues. Like the fan would rev up like crazy and then go down because there's so much dust in here. No air could flow through the heatsink. It was a P4, so they put out a decent amount of heat. So we'll see what this does to how the fan performance, so get it cleaned up, and some new thermal paste on here too. Okay, so now what I did was I took this enclosure, which contains the heatsink, and there's screws here at the bottom, there's shoulders on them, and I took them out so I could remove the heatsink itself from this enclosure. You just take the screws out and you spread it. It's just plastic, don't overdo it, but you can get it out. And the pointy edge goes to the front of the computer, because you see there's a whole bunch of stuff in the way here, but there's square space here, so that's how you know which way to put it back in. So now what I do is I'm going to clean the thermal paste off of here, because it's all old and nasty and crackled, and there's nothing, it's hard as a rock. And I'm going to put the fan enclosure back in, which isn't too big of a deal. I just got to slip it in under those cables up here. You can see it's a million times better in here now. I mean, there was probably 5 pounds of dust in here. This is probably one of the worst computers I've worked on. Actually, I was surprised. I didn't think there was so much when I looked at the outside of it, but definitely a lot of dust buildup in this thing, and you can see how it affects the entire computer. You know, instead of the heat sinks get caked over, it just can't really deal with it anymore. You know, airflow starts, the fan starts running like crazy, trying to blow enough air through. So we'll see how this thing performs once I get all this back together with new heatsink compound. Alright, so now I got the fan back in. It's just a matter of slipping all the tabs in the back. Just to lock in, make sure you plug the wiring in, and just slip the hard drive cables back into the slots. And then you can just slip the hard drive, it just has tabs, so we did. Just slides in and you plug the cables in. So now I'm working on getting the heatsink goo off, and as you can see, it's not very good anymore. It's just coming off in chips. It's all dried out. So I just scrape this with the razor blade a little bit, get all the big stuff off. Be careful not to gouge the aluminum. And I'm going to do the same thing to the processor. So I'm going to do it with the vacuum running, and you be extremely careful not to get any of this stuff in the gaps, because this is an LGA 775 socket and there's exposed pins in here. You don't want to get the stuff in there. And once you do that, I'll spread on some new stuff and we'll put this all back together. Okay, so now I cleaned up the heatsink. You can see it's nice and shiny. You can see all the black stuff. I scraped off most of it with a standard straight razor blade. And then I use the CRC QD contact cleaner. They sell stuff at Lowe's, home improvement stores. Get some other places. It's really fast drying, doesn't mess up any kind of electronic stuff, and it really cuts the goo off. You don't use alcohol or anything else, but scraping it first is definitely an improvement, because instead of smearing around glops of it, you're just taking a little bit of coating that's left. So you clean up the processor too. So now I'm going to put on some Arctic Silver 5. I'm going to apply it only to the CPU, and a very thin coating. It's all you need. I've done a whole bunch of computers with this tube, and you're there's still plenty in it. The plunger's got plenty of place to go. So I'm going to get some of this on there and smear it around using the razor blade, just enough to cover the surface. That's all you need. I might use a little bit more on here because this heatsink has a very rough finish on it. It's a cheap Dell heatsink. Usually good enthusiast stuff doesn't have as much variation in the surface, although this isn't that bad. So I'm going to see how this goes. I mean, you don't need much. The more you put on, the more stuff there is between the heatsink and the CPU. It's just supposed to fill in little microscopic ridges, not be a layer of stuff. I mean, I've seen people smear on it running down the board. It's like, no, you just need a tiny bit. A little bit goes a long way here. Okay, so now you can see I spread the heatsink compound on the CPU. It's just a very thin coating. There's not much on there. The tube hasn't gone down at all. I use razor blade to smear. I just basically take the tip and rub it around while squeezing a little bit out, so you get like a whole bunch of little lines, looks like a snail track. And you just take the blade, which has to be clean, and you just smooth it out in this manner. And as you move it around, you're trying to get on the edges, and it comes off with very minimal waste on the blade, and you have even coverage on the CPU. So now when I put the heatsink on, it doesn't have to squeeze any of it out. It's just going to be there, and it's going to fill in the gaps, and we should have much better thermal performance now, especially once this burns in for just a little while, let it really settle in. Alright, so I'm going to install the heatsink assembly, and it just hooks on. These tabs at the end here, they hook on to these guides here, and then the screws, which are spring-loaded so they can't fall out, just get tightened down into the holes in the motherboard that go through into the back of the case. So I'm just going to toss this in now. Okay, I got it back in now. The screws are a little tricky to start. You might have to bend the plastic. The whole thing is kind of floppy. Alright, so we got power. It's booting up. That front panel back together. Fans running. And no clogs in here anymore. Heatsinks feel like anything warm at the base. It's transferring heat. So I'd call this a success. So far, no ridiculous fan rating. We'll have to give it some time and put the side panel back on in a minute. Overall, I think it's a success. Not one of Dell's best design ideas with the heatsink integrated into the fan, but overall it works out okay. Just gotta make sure you have some heatsink compound on hand before you take it apart. Hope this helps someone who's got a Dell Dimension, you know, old series, 3100.